Please repeat after me. With this ring, I thee pledge.
With this ring, I thee pledge.
That you're going to love, honor, and cherish double wedding ring quilts with Victoria Findlay Wolfe up next on The Quilt Show. It's a new day for quilting with your co-hosts on The Quilt Show, Alex Anderson and Ricky Timms.
Welcome to The Quilt Show, everyone. You are going to be so happy with today's show.
Now, I have to ask the audience, how many of you out there have either because it was inherited or you have made a double wedding ring quilt in your possession? Alex, do you have one?
I have my grandma's.
Yeah, they are so popular, and they've been timeless classics for such a long time.
They are, and I have to say that I love my grandma's because it's my grandma's, but I've never really been drawn to them, but our guest today, I got goosebumps just thinking about it, all the way down to my toes.
Well, what she has done with double wedding ring over the last few years has been nothing short of amazing. We're really excited to welcome to The Quilt Show, Victoria Findlay Wolfe.
Welcome.
Yay.
We're so glad to have you back.
Thank you. I'm super excited to be here.
Yeah, I have to say, you are currently the reigning queen of double wedding ring quilts.
Well, I certainly have a problem with them, don't I?
I wouldn't call it a problem.
Well, your first double wedding ring, the first one,
right,
you actually showed us on the other show that we taped with you.
It was 1404. So if you're looking
Quite
for
a while
that
ago.
previous show, yeah.
And it has a little bit of a story.
It does have a bit of a story. That was the one that kind of started this whole ball rolling in the first place. So I'm always looking for a pattern or something that I haven't made before. And at the time when I made Double Edged Love, which is that quilt that won at QuiltCon 2013, the first year, that was it for me. I had a quilt top, I didn't really like it, and I thought, what could I do with it? So I cut it up, and I turned it into a double wedding ring, and 60 quilts later.
60 double wedding ring quilt later.
I told you I had a problem.
Well, I want to look at the first quilt so people can understand how your quilts are so different. Oh, they're the best.
So this one, with the orange double wedding rings, tell us about that.
Yeah, so this quilt is called A Summer's Day, and we may have talked about it. You know, all of my work is really based on my grandmother's double knit polyester scrap quilts that she used to make. So this is where I learned to quilt, was using scraps, and which is what I used in the background on this quilt.
Is there polyester in that?
Not in this one, but I have made some double knit polyester double wedding ring quilts.
Okay.
Too.
Right.
So, but this was a quilt that was inspired by a quilt that my grandmother had made, which actually carries the little maroon and gold star flower down at the bottom edge of that quilt. But this was actually started because of the inside Lemoyne star piece, which I had made quite a while ago, but I liked the colors and I didn't really know what to do with it. And so I took my rotary cutter and cut it up. I have this habit of let's just turn it into something else because it looked good, but it wasn't great.
So before you do that, does your heart go, or is it like, oh, yeah?
It's kind of a rush. You know? Quilting can be an extreme sport, let me tell you. Kind of get a rush out of that. So I like to just take a rotary cutter to it, change it, and turn it into something that's usable. You know, I don't think you should get hung up on making a mistake on something, but how can you make it beautiful? So using my grandmother's quilt as inspiration, that's kind of what happened with that quilt.
So this other one, to me, it's like a New York beauty, yet double wedding ring. Tell us about this.
Yeah, so when I was exploring the double wedding rings, I thought, so that one has a traditional layout of the double wedding ring, but I thought, well, what if I expand that space and use that as an area to try something different? So that quilt is talking about my New York City neighborhood where I live, so why not put elements of the New York beauty into that block? But I've also expanded that so that melon is, you know, huge. I call it my Big Mama quilt. It's actually Bright Lights Big City, but the pattern of it is quite a big guy. So I'm always looking at those shapes within a double wedding ring to see, now what can I do with it? So starting with the traditional, making it big, and then taking it small, like in the next quilt.
Well, I want to step away from the double wedding rings for 2 seconds just to talk about what you've really been up to besides just making 1,000,000 double wedding ring quilts. What are you doing in your life these days? Are you traveling?
Always traveling. There's always a lot of traveling going on, either for work or for fun, for family stuff that we're doing. We just went to Antarctica. That was fantastic.
I saw that on Facebook.
Trip of a lifetime.
Trip of a lifetime.
And you're a Harley mama?
My Harley. Harley's in the shop at the moment, but that doesn't stop me. I like to have those moments of getting my head in the wind. That's a nice place to relax. You understand that.
Absolutely. And I just have to tell everybody, one of the funny things about you is because of your name, Victoria Findlay Wolfe, which I think it's just great, and I think of it all the time, but how many people call you Virginia?
Virginia Wolfe. Yeah.
Who's afraid of?
Don't be afraid. I'm pretty friendly, but just call me V. V works. VFW,
V.
Initials.
I love that because your initials are VFW, and in America, that's Veterans of Foreign War, I believe, right?
Yeah.
And so your website is VFWQuilts.com. So there's a lot of ways to find Victoria. Even if they do Google Victoria,
Virginia
Wolfe, they'll still find you.
I pretty much answer to all V names at this point.
So this adorable red one.
Yeah, so what else I've been doing is I design dies for Sizzix. So using die cutting to be able to cut multiple layers at a time. That quilt is done with one of my double wedding ring dies.
Nice.
Yeah.
Makes it faster and accurate.
Yeah, accurate. And also, who wants to hand cut all those tiny little pieces?
Right, right. So, okay, I kind of said in the beginning that double wedding ring wasn't anything that I was drawn to now, but what drew you to this particular classic pattern?
Just because I hadn't done it before. And when I'm teaching and lecturing, one of the questions I always ask people is, what's the #1 quilt you said you'd never make? They always say double wedding ring.
Really?
Always. Or they've started it and they've never finished it, or they started one and someone got divorced, so the quilt never got finished, all of that kind of stuff. So I was really fascinated by the why. And mostly it's fear, that people get hung up on the fear of piecing those curves. And frankly, none of these techniques are really hard to do. You just need a few minutes to be able to learn how to get over that fear and cut the fabric and have fun with it.
So is that the biggest thing you've learned from it, is just get over the fear?
Get over the fear of it, that they're really not that hard to do, and that I call them patience builders, because who doesn't need more patience?
Well, and you can't make 60 of them and not really learn a few things. So what have they taught you?
Well, it really changed my process. I work very, very quickly. Most of my quilts when I started were improv based, and I'm cutting and sewing, and I'm finishing a quilt in a day and moving it quickly as I can.
Whoa. One of these in a day? No.
One in her earlier work.
In the early work.
Oh, okay,
in the early work.
No.
But then when I started the double wedding ring and I found I had to sit with the process longer.
Oh, gotcha.
Totally changed the way that I work. So, although I can pretty much crank them out pretty quickly.
And do you have roots in double wedding ring that, history or
not
grandma
particularly,
or anything like that?
Just my grandmother's work. Hers is the scrappy piecing that you'll find often in many of my quilts.
So that's where that comes from.
Yeah.
And then this white one is just so beautiful.
Yeah, it's quiet. That was a bit of a challenge for me, is trying to use all solids. There's actually not all solids in there, but you have to get up close to it to see which ones where I dropped a little secret in there. But that was really just kind of playing. It's called color play, playing with the color palette and focusing on light and dark and contrast and see what I can do with it. But again, it's the double wedding ring. It's still a double wedding ring, although I have not pieced those small melons that you find in the traditional double wedding ring. But taking information out of a quilt sometimes can be an interesting way to approach that pattern.
Well, your first book is 15 Minutes of Play, which was what the other show was about, and that really spoke to me. Sit down and sew, get with the program.
Sometimes it's to get yourself to stop thinking. And that's one way to do it, is just to sew a bunch of scraps together.
And then this is your double wedding ring quilt book, and this was written, about
a year and a half ago.
Yeah, and your quilts have been on tour for
They've been traveling for the past
So you had a
years.
special exhibit. Tell us about that.
Yeah. Well, at Houston last year, I had 18 double wedding rings on display there. That was really nice.
Did that feel good?
That was pretty awesome. And so was the International Quilt Study Center. So the fact that some of these quilts are now going to live in places where they'll be taken care of the rest beyond my lifetime. That's you talking about goosebumps. There goes my hair on my arms. Yeah, it's kind of awesome.
I'm excited that what's old is always new again. It never changes. History repeats itself.
Absolutely.
You've certainly brought a fresh spin on it. What I want to look at now is the next quilt, because it's really going to take us into our second segment. So talk about this quilt.
Right. So this is working with freeform curves, and this is something that I started doing way back when I first started quilting. So it's kind of taking a step backwards. But going through, and we'll talk about how do you put those freeform curves together, how can you build a quilt without a pattern and get over that fear of curves, because they're really not hard to do. You don't have to pin anything. You just need to know how to cut the fabric and sew them together and have fun with it and just, Once you know how to do that, then you know how to jump into how to do template curves.
So I guess that will conquer the fear, and then the double wedding ring will make it easy, and that's exactly what we're going to do. Victoria's going to come back after the break and show us how to do the free-form curves, right?
You bet.
And then later in the show, we're going to work on the double wedding ring, so don't go anywhere.
No fear of windy roads with tons of curves.
That's right. We'll be right back, everybody.
First on deck with Victoria, or V. I can't call you V. I am so sorry.
Whatever you want to call me, I'll answer.
I won't call you Virginia, though.
Okay.
Okay.
This might be the one I might not answer to.
There you go. We were setting up everyone for, you're going to show us how easy it is to do simple curves, but sorry, we have to talk about fabric, because you do design with Marcus, right?
I do, yeah.
These are just beautiful. And somebody said, oh, you need to open it up. And we're like, no, this is art, just like this.
They're pretty to see all bundled up like that, aren't they?
Oh, yeah, I buy these things and I'll look at them for a year before I can cut them up, you know?
Buy them to pet them.
Yeah, and then you have threads with Aurifil.
I do. I have several boxes of thread with Aurifil, my favorite. I'm using all the different weights, either for hand quilting or piecing.
Nice.
I like to have all my colors.
Nice.
It's kind of like candy, right?
Yeah. So this is the sample that you're going to talk about, and this is also your first fabric line?
Yep. No, this is Meadow Storm, actually. Meadow Storm is the second line. That's out with Marcus. Why not play with it, right?
Right.
Let's cut it up.
Right.
That's what we want to do. So, yeah, we're going to talk about freeform curves and how really that curves are just not hard to do.
No.
And so this is a really fun way to take some scrap fabric and just have a little fun with what's going to happen, what can you do with it, and kind of get yourself over that fear of cutting fabric and also doing curves.
Okay, so you're going to do it, and you're going to sew for us too, right?
Jump right in and do this, right? Okay, so anytime when we're, cutting our fabrics, often we're always putting our fabrics right sides together, right?
Yes.
Right. So in this case, though, when we're cutting freeform curves, we want to put the fabrics, both fabrics right sides up, okay? So we're going to just kind of overlap my fabrics. Both fabrics, this is a solid, but, that's okay. They can still be right sides up.
Okay.
So they're laying right sides up. We're going to take the rotary cutter, and we're just going to cut a nice, gentle curve.
Okay, gentle curve.
Gentle.
Right.
Gentle. We're not talking like drunkard path kind of curves.
Right,
we're just talking about gentle curves. So the reason we want to do that,
you need a little more cutting? Sure.
Yeah, or a little scissors, whatever we got there.
Yeah, this is a quilting show, and we don't have any scissors.
That's all right. Okay, so the reason we want to do that is
there we
got a
go.
little bit extra there. Let me get that guy cut off there.
And I won't close. There we go.
I could pull it, but I know some people freak out when they see it pulling the fabrics too.
You got bias going on too.
Yeah, so you don't want to pull it so much. But that also leads to when we're sewing our curves together.
Okay.
Okay, so I now have the mirror image of the curves that I've just cut.
Okay.
Right? If I would have put those right sides together, they would have looked wrong, and you would have sewn it, you would have had a three-dimensional object.
Right.
We're not going for three-dimensional, we're going for flat, okay? So actually, let me have that one more time. I'm just gonna straighten up my fabric so they're about the same size, because that shows me then where I'm going to line up my curves. What I like about doing this is you don't need pins. Clearly, we don't need a scissors.
I love this technique. I love it. It's playtime.
Fast and it's easy, right? So now I'm gonna put the fabrics right sides together, right? I'm gonna line them up. The most important thing that you need to know when you're sewing these is that these great machines that we spend all this hard-earned money on, right? They have these things called feed dogs, okay? People forget that feed dogs are the thing that take the fabric through the machine. So that's very important to know when you're sewing curves, is to let the feed dogs take the fabric through it, because I don't know about you, I've done it. Have you done it where you've gotten to the end where you're like, oh, I just need another ½ inch of fabric, so you start pulling the fabric?
No, I just cut it off.
Okay, or that, and make it work. But often people start stretching the fabrics and not letting the feed dogs go through. So when you're doing the freeform curves, you need to let the fabrics go through the machine.
Okay.
Let them go through, take it nice and easy. Because if you start pulling the fabric, we've cut mirror images. So if you're pulling that fabric, you're gonna mess and distort. You're gonna distort the curve, and we don't wanna do that. Okay, so this is a lot about hand placement. My bottom hand is just keeping that bottom fabric flat. My bottom hand. My right hand, that would be my right hand, okay, holding the bottom fabric flat. My left hand is just gonna guide and keep my raw edges of my fabric together as I'm sewing. I'm not pulling it, I'm letting the machine take the curve I'm just aligning my raw edges as I go.
And you're not worrying about a perfect quarter inch either.
I'm not worrying about a perfect quarter inch. I'm keeping them pretty darn close. It's also, I don't have my glasses on.
I know.
They're laying right here, but I didn't put them on. So, you know, we're gonna go with it, okay? But that's what's kind of fun, to just take these and experiment with it.
There's the cutter right there.
Again, don't have my glasses on, right? Okay.
Let's bring this over. Let's reveal it over here.
Okay, let's snip this little starter ender off there.
Get that thing off there. Okay.
Okay, so why this is fun is, if you don't pull the fabrics are gonna lay flat.
Look at that.
Okay?
I love
that. If you start pulling that mirror image, then it's going to be waving at you all the way across the room. We don't want it to do that.
Do you press now?
I do press, and often when I'm pressing, in this case I have a light and a dark fabric, so I'd probably want to try pressing it to the dark side.
Okay, yeah.
But that often is not the case. It can be whatever way the fabric is kind of leaning, you can make it go the way that it wants to go, okay?
But only one way.
One way.
Okay.
It only needs to go one way. So what's fun about this technique, though, is that you can keep adding and doing multiple layers again.
So you would just go like that, do another curve, and there you go.
And you can just keep on going, right? Where you're adding more and more curves.
Right.
You can square these out to any size block that you want.
Right.
It's one place for you to start playing, to design a quilt on your own without using a pattern, just using this fun technique and playing with the curves.
And it grows so fast and so big.
Exactly. It's like the Wave Runner quilt that I showed you, where I just did big rectangles, big squares, sew it all together, square it up, quilt it, call it a day, right?
Okay, so that's going one way.
That's playing one way, right?
Let me open this
I've added
up.
a few. Then this guy is kind of playing more with the diagonal.
Look at that.
Adding a couple curves, going every which way. So I'm cutting these bigger than I need them to be, and then I'm cutting them down to the size that I want them to be when I'm sewing them together.
How much bigger about?
Inch and a half, maybe.
Okay.
So, you know, you're gonna have waste. I'm a scrap quilter, so I don't have any problem with having the extra scraps laying around.
No,
so
you don't,
anything
'cause
I
you
cut
can
off, I use it somewhere else.
You can go sew it the next morning for your 15 minutes of play.
Right. Now you're talking my language.
So I think, does that have a curve to it? Or is,
some of them are, they're very gentle curves.
Wow.
Okay? So this is just a really fun way to be able to play with, trying to come up with some different techniques. And sometimes, you know what happens? Sometimes you make some that are really not that great, or not that cute.
That don't speak to your heart.
So like I made this quilt, it was X's and O's, it's kind of cute. Then I made this out of my leftover blocks. So these were the four, you can see that they're the opposite, positive and negative, right? And I thought, not so interesting.
I kind of like it, but not for you, huh?
It's not so great. I'm not really crazy about the motion of it, but I dropped in, adding another element, something fun to play with. But then this is where my mind goes. Now what can I do with it?
Okay, right, because you look at
it, done that.
Okay,
now what can I do, right? So what if we just take this, let's fold it up. Okay. I brought a couple of these little guys.
That's your fabric line too. I really like that, by the way.
Yeah, the Manor stripes. Those are a lot of fun there.
Those.
Okay. So if we just line these up, let's get crazy. Can I take that guy from you? I want to just let me have that. Okay. Can we cut this? I'm just gonna. Let's just do this. Isn't that fun?
Yeah.
Yeah. Look.
But now what do you do?
Well, I don't know. Let's open it up and take a look and see what else we can do with it. Okay, so now look at.
Ooh, nice.
Well, that's kind of interesting. But since we just learned how to do our curves, this is now the same curve that we just did. And now I can sew these guys in.
Yes.
I can square it back up.
Yes.
And now I have something that's a little bit more interesting than what I started out with. So although that might have been a cute block to start out with, I've made that, I've done that before. But now I've just added one little change to it, and now it's kind of cool.
Well, I'm going to tell you, I liked it the way it was before, but I really like this.
That's where the fun comes in. Yeah. Sometimes just take your rotor cutter, cut it, and see what's going to happen, because we all know you have more fabric.
Yes, we do. We do. And I know where you can get some if you don't.
Exactly.
You know, exactly.
There's a whole bunch right there.
So I want to ask the audience, how many of you would be willing to just do what she just did? Yes? Oh, they got a great.
They're pretty good. I've heard a couple gasps.
Yeah.
So that works for me too. You know, sometimes we all have quilt tops that we've started and not finished. Those are opportunities for us to go back and try something different to them, because otherwise they're going to end up in a thrift shop, then I have to go buy them. And I have enough work to do.
There you go.
So, you know, I encourage them to go and cut up those quilt tops and try to do something new and different with them.
I love this. And this is all a segue into the double wedding ring, right?
This totally relates to now when I'm showing you how to piece a double wedding ring curves, template curves, things that are tighter, because it becomes about 3 or 4 inches of sewing. It becomes a gentle curve, and there's nothing to be afraid of.
So, if you think this is fun, Victoria is going to show us how this works into the double wedding ring, right?
Yep, that's coming next. It's showing that it's really not that hard to do.
I want to do it, but I think Ricky wants his shot.
Okay, well, we'll let them play.
Okay, stick around, you guys.
We're having a great time with Victoria Findlay Wolfe. And Victoria, I have to say, I love how you have really brought a fresh look and approach to double wedding ring.
Well, thank you very much.
Now, one of the things that you say is that you need to kind of do one and do another and explore and always shift and change. Tell me what you think about that.
Well, like I said, fabric it's just fabric. We can cut that, we can play it, we have more, we can, it's an opportunity it should be fun, right? Quilting's fun.
It is fun.
I hope it's fun.
It is fun.
It should be fun. So we shouldn't get hung up on being afraid to try a new technique like curves.
And for people that are actually designing and wanting to do stuff, don't you recommend that they explore and do more than just one? I mean, we talk about working in a series.
Right.
How do you feel about working in a series?
I never meant to, but it just kind of happened because as I was playing with all of these different shapes, particularly within the double wedding ring, there are so many different parts to it that I just found there were so many different ways that I could change the motion of the quilt. I'm always looking at the vertical and the horizontal and the diagonal design of what's happening. And if you just have a block quilt, you always have that block grid. But in these curves, I found them just so exciting because I can change this direction a million different ways, and you don't just see that standard grid. That's the thing that excites me.
That's great. And we're just going to scratch the surface on that today.
Totally.
Well, let's talk about the construction of the block.
Okay. So as we were talking about in the freeform curves, that you can do gentle curves and not even have to really pin them to do that.
Right.
So in this case, when you're doing template curves, I do 3 pins.
Okay.
So
and I notice you're wearing them actually.
I keep them handy.
Is that your trademark?
It pretty much is. Because everyone's like, you got 3 pins there. I'm like, yeah, I know. Those are my 3 pins. So, we have them handy. That way I know where they are, okay? So anytime, when you start then with template curves, the same thing that I said about the freeform curves is that you need to keep the mirror image in place. So your first pin is always finding the center, lining them up. Little finger press is always a good way to do that. That's your first pin, because I don't want to mess with the mirror image when I'm sewing these curves, okay?
Okay.
So I've finger pressed it. I'm going to pin it. Okay.
Very good, all right.
Now my other pins are going to go on the end. You have a tiny little dog ear.
Yeah, I see that, and I think that's
lining up.
something that people oftentimes forget, is they try to actually match up the edges of the fabric, but you've got to kind of offset them where there's a little inset
That's
there.
a very good point, because I found out that some people, even after 30 years, don't know about how you line up that dog ear. Mathematically, it actually doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but visually, if you're putting your raw edges together, where my fingernail is right now, it's kind of hard to see on this. Where the white fabric and the yellow fabric are intersecting, that's my 1/4 inch. It's
Yes.
a 1/4 inch where your needle is going to start hitting the fabric that you need your 2 layers of fabric there. So it's not a 1/4 inch of fabric, otherwise my seams are intersecting at a 1/2
that's way
inch.
too much.
That's not it. So it's a tiny amount of fabric that sticks off the end. That's so that after you've sewn it, you open it up, your raw edge, your curve is going to line up.
Sure.
Okay. So that's my second pin, and then I'm going to come around and I'm going to do the same thing on the third side.
I love that there's only 3 pins.
There's only 3 pins.
Because I've seen people trying to put 20 pins in
Well,
there.
and there's a reason that I do this. One is to get people to really look at how the fabric's going underneath the needle again, okay? So this goes back to the freeform curves thing. When we're focusing from first pin to second pin, you barely have a curve anymore.
And it's what,
there's
like
no curve.
4 inches or so?
It's like 4 inches. That's all you're focusing on when you're sewing it. And if you check your pinning after you've done it, your raw edges should come right together. So I can already see if I put that underneath my needle and I start sewing, I have no extra fabric. There's nothing to ease in.
Okay.
Easing's not a quilting term. That's for putting sleeves and
Yes,
things
I
in,
understand,
right?
It should just fit.
Yeah, it should just fit. So then we're going to take that to the
let's do it.
machine. And the other thing is, which way do we sew this? I'm not giving it away.
Okay.
I'm giving giving it away.
Well, I don't know. Tell me.
Floppy toppy.
Floppy toppy. All right.
It's a visual. You always remember it then. Belly on the bottom, the floppy toppy. The part with more fabric should be on the top.
Okay.
So the reason I like that too is if you do put 50 pins in there and you try to sew that, people will go, well, I pinned it. Why do I have pleats in it? It's because you've put the fabric where you think it needs to go and not actually letting the fabric fit where it's supposed to go with your mirror image, okay? So I'm gonna stick this underneath my needle. I'm gonna start to sew that. I'm gonna do a little back stitch. Oh, look, these things, they really help a lot.
Amazing, isn't it?
Yeah. Whoever thought of that, I don't know.
Now, do you sew right over the pin?
I'm going to take my pin out.
Okay, all right.
Let me just put that back in my pin holder. Okay, so this is about hand position also, okay? So my right hand is holding at my second pin.
Oh, that's nice.
I am keeping that bottom layer flat, right? Belly on the bottom is a flat piece of fabric. Because you have the concave floppy toppy, it looks like you have more fabric than there really is. It's not. It's the same amount, but by keeping that bottom layer flat and you have the concave curve on top, there's more bias, so it looks like it's not going to fit. But by holding that flat, I can see right now that I can sew from where I first pinned to my second pin, and it's going to fit perfectly.
And I can see that the edges are aligned.
My edges are aligned. This is just like doing my raw edge on the freeform curves.
And you're basically doing 1/4" seam.
I'm doing a 1/4" seam. Templates are designed actually with a 1/4" seam, so not to get all quilt policey or anything, it's just a technical term. That's how they're actually designed, is to have a 1/4" seam, so that is important. Okay, so now I'm repositioning my hand. My right hand again goes to the last pin. I'm gonna get my raw edges together.
So you're kind of reaching underneath to line them up.
You know, my hand is really being the pins.
Oh,
I'm holding that. I'm not feeding the top layer underneath my needle because that means I'm going to run out of fabric when I get to the end, right? I need all of that fabric to lay perfectly flat as I'm sewing it. And I need to get back underneath here, get my raw edges together.
Well, and one of the things that I like about this whole process is that you're actually using kind of large pieces.
Yes.
These are not itty-bitty pieces, they're tiny pieces, so they actually are a little bit more forgiving.
Well, they are, but it's also the bias of the fabric gives you that little bit of room in there also.
All right.
Okay, so again, those 3 pins, why that's important is I could spend the time and put 50 pins in there, but we have already discussed that it takes a long time to put a double wedding ring together. It's a slow process. I don't need to spend even more time pinning all of that. So 3 pins gets you your curve, and what's fun about that curve is it's the same curve now through the entire rest of the quilt.
Okay, pressing this.
Pressing that seam, I'll press it this way to the
towards the ring.
To the dark side, and particularly in this fabric, it's going to go to the arc. Okay.
All right. Now the same process for the next part of it.
Yeah. So when I'm making these little melon units, actually, when you're making the parts of the double wedding ring, you're going to make all of the melons first. A melon meaning that whole unit is a melon. Okay. So that's my first step. One arc always gets the small melon. The second arc is going to get the squares. Okay. So now again, first thing you're going to do is find your center. I've already found my center here, but I can't see it, so I'm going to do it again. There it is, right? That's my first pin.
Now, let me guess. Are you going to match the seams this time?
I'm going to match that seam, and you can see that I've pressed the seam open on my squares.
Okay.
Ease of construction. I'm pinning at a 1/4" exactly through that seam because I'm going to make that seam line up with this seam on the arc of the melon that I've already sewn together. This is one of those points where people will spend a lot of time with a seam ripper on this quilt. So this is how you do it. You pin it where it's supposed to live, right?
There you go.
All right.
You're going to stay right there.
You are going to stay right there, and I do sew over my pins on that. You can hand crank it so that you're not busting your needle and messing with the timing, right? You don't want to do that. You take your time. Right? We've already established these are patience builders. All need more patience.
Well, and like you said, you're always probably with the time, you're always thinking about what can I do next and how can I change it?
Yeah, exactly. All right. And so now again, then we're back to sewing. We have those 3 pins in place. And I'll start at the beginning. That's a straight edge, so I'm just keeping my raw edges together. I'm going to hop over my pin, and then it's the same thing that we just talked about. keeping that bottom layer flat. We can see it's going to fit. I can sew from first pin to second pin to third pin, and finish sewing it, okay?
Absolutely. You guys out there, how many of you have been a little afraid of curves before? A little bit like, I don't know. But do you think this is going to work? Yeah? I think it's going to be a fabulous way to do it. Now let's talk about the construction of this guy. Well, actually, no, I want to come back and talk about your templates.
Yeah, well, let's look at them on here.
Okay, all right, because you've got your own templates to make this really easy.
Yeah, so this is one of in my book, all the patterns for the quilts are in the book, in paper, which I've done all my quilts out of paper templates, because everyone's like, you can't do that. You can totally do that. But one of the quilts, this is the standard double wedding ring set. This is one that I did in acrylic, so that you could have the opportunity to cut all of these pieces out. And it's fun to go sometimes and look at your leftover blocks, like a 12.5-inch block. This fits perfectly on there. So you could be changing this pattern by just cutting your leftover blocks out, sticking that in
UFOs,
there.
and put them in this area.
Right? That can fill in that space. Those are the kind of things I'm always looking at. So that's why they're clear. So you can see what the fabric is going to do under there, right? The next thing is that when you're putting a double wedding ring quilt together, you're going to make all of the melons in the quilt first before you put anything together. Okay.
And if you have like this guy here goes purple, 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 you're planning that on some level.
On this, I would be laying this whole quilt out on my design wall so that I can see where I'm sewing things together.
Okay.
But the other part that's important, after you've made all of your melons and you've laid out the quilt before you start sewing things together, it's good to know where the rows land in this quilt.
Okay. So people will do all these Y seams and crazy patchwork, is that true?
I get that as an email going, well, I'm having a really hard time with the Y seams. I go, well, wait, there's no Y seams in this quilt. So let's just do one fear at a time. Curves, but let's not deal with Y seams today. Okay, so what you're actually looking for, it's a curvy girl. There she is. It's va-va-voom, right? Va-va-voom. That's how you're going to remember visually how to put this quilt together. And ultimately, this is the same curve that you're doing when you start sewing those melons together.
So you guys can see that from out there, right? This one starts with the end.
This one's going to start the concave square with the one melon. Then you're going to come to a full ring. It comes back to the concave square, back to a full ring,
and
depending on how big your quilt is going to go. Exactly. So my second row, this one started on the skinny. This one's going to start with the full and go skinny, right? So here you can start to see how I'm building this next section. So on this one, like the one that we just made, he's going to live up here. I would sew these guys the opposite sides together. Then I would be doing these.
And you have a ring.
And then you have a full ring.
Full ring.
Then I can add my concave square in this part easily, because these guys sew on really, really fast and quickly.
And pinning the same way? Matching the centers?
Pinning the same way. So when I come back then and I want to sew these rows together, I already have my little 4 squares where I know where I need to pin. I'm going to be pinning there, there, there. And I'm going to be pinning my centers. Actually, I pin my centers first on this because it's really hard to go back after you've pinned that to try to find your centers. So pin your centers always first.
And then your seams will match.
Pin your little sections. And then it's that same thing. You're going from pin to pin to pin to pin to pin.
Fabulous.
Right? So it's barely even a curve anymore.
Well, honestly, I think I've got it. Do you guys got it? And there goes my Texas grammar again. Do you guys got it?
You got it? I got it.
Let's look at some variations here, because I really like this. Now, we're going to do these relatively quick.
Yes.
But let's talk about them each, okay?
Yep. So this is where I have a lot of fun. So when we're talking about changing one thing within a pattern, this is how you get 60 double wedding ring quilts, okay? Very good example. My one arc, I've cut out a piece of blue, I've lopped off a piece, and I've stitched and flipped on this little piece of dark blue.
So all 4 of those are the same, and they create this fun little patchwork
Exactly.
inside
So if
there.
I went on to completely design that quilt, you're going to get an interesting interruption in the pattern.
Okay, and this guy?
This time, my 15 minutes of play, dropping that into the concave square in the small melons, and then keeping the traditional aspect of piecing all of the little parts.
I love that.
It's just an interesting look. Same time, same kind of concept. Sometimes people ask me, where do I get the ideas for my quilts? Well, for this time, I put all the made fabric in the arcs and the squares instead of the concave squares, right? Doing the opposite. And then thinking, well, this reminds me of my job to pick the eggs up underneath the chickens on the farm.
When you were on the farm, yeah.
Made me those brown speckled eggs, so then I made the chicken quilt. So, sometimes the idea comes afterwards.
That's fabulous. All right, now let's look at this, because I like the way that this takes a variation. And this variation now is
Yes.
Show the melon. Show us the melon on this guy.
Let's grab one of these guys for scale.
Okay.
So in the standard double wedding ring, that's what you got. This time, this is your melon.
It's really big.
So I wanted that to be big so that I'd have this space to be able to play with what information I'm putting in there.
And you really can create anything in there.
Anything. Your leftover orphan blocks. This is actually a 6.5-inch square on this Bright Lights Big City quilt. So standard 6.5-inch turn dash. What if I put that in there? Now I've changed the look of that quilt one more time.
And you could just keep playing.
How can you stop?
This quilt, tell me the name of this again.
So this is the same pattern, Bright Lights Big City.
And you can see it's got the big melons with the 6-inch squares.
Yep.
And it's so completely different than the other ones.
And completely scrap busting.
And the last one over here, you just basically took out all the patchwork.
Take all the piecing out. Just work with that full template piece. That's another piece that comes with my template set. Just cutting out, scrap busting, using up your fabrics, sews together really fast.
Exciting?
Yes.
Yay!
Totally exciting.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
you're
you so
welcome.
much. Now, you guys, I'm sure you've heard of G's Bend. Am I correct? Raise your hand. I know that you know.
I know.
And if you don't, we're going to actually take a little classroom experience with G's Bend when we come back. Don't go anywhere.
Everyone, I need to comment on the last segment, may I?
Sure.
I just love how you put that together, because honestly, I've been afraid of doing one, and you made it so easy. And
They're not hard.
I love the mashup of the modern and contemporary with traditional. It's just the best.
It is. I keep saying everything old is new again, and that's one of my big things these days.
Absolutely.
So thinking about, what's old is new again, I think about quilts that maybe my own grandmother made, and they were often just chunks of fabric just put together. And then G's Bend has been a kind of a revolutionary exhibition that people have seen their works. But let's talk a little bit about who G's Bend is. And I believe, Victoria, you discovered some things about them and have maybe even more information than I do about them.
Well, it was just kind of fluky when I learned about them. My daughter in 3rd grade was watching a video on Martin Luther King, and it talked about G's Bend. And this was about the time when I found quilt blogs and started quilting, because I've always been a scrap quilter. I didn't really know about books and patterns and all of this stuff. So they were talking about G's Bend and how in the 60s with the race riots and Dr. King and what happened at G's Bend when they took the ferry away, because they were trying to discourage
because it's on an island.
They're trying to get people off the island, and they took the ferry away, which basically left them on their island having to deal with whatever they had. So they were really making quilts strictly out of necessity and not thinking so much about pattern. And I was very moved by that and the historical aspect of that. I wanted to know more about it. So we went right away, purchased a book on the G's Bend ladies to see what they were doing, and it was very inspired by it. So this was really a lot of the kind of work that I was doing before I knew what they were anyway.
This is yours.
This was an interpretation. My daughter and I flipped through the book together, and I really had, it's almost like going to church experience of going, these are amazing. And it's nice to know when you find people who work similar or think similar to the way that you do, that you're finding your community. So, flipping through there, she picked out a quilt that she liked. And so I built this quilt on the style of the G's Bend ladies. And it was a very inspiring time for me creatively, from switching from being an artist and going into quilting full time, to know that it's okay to do that. Yeah. That you can just cut stuff up and not think so hard about the decisions that you're making, and sometimes make the most beautiful quilts.
And this guy here is, of course, it's really large, chunky fabrics, which is also very typical of the G's Bend.
Right.
But this led you to doing your more innovative, curvy stuff that we saw at the beginning of the show, which then led to it all leads into each other.
And actually, your daughter, as we tape, is 16, and she's here today.
Yeah, Beatrice, hey, how are you out there?
Is she a quilter?
She's always said she's not a quilter, but she very much loves to do origami and build. She is a builder, definitely, whether it's computer programming or building something with paper. So actually this summer, I got her doing a little English paper piecing.
Hey, let's hear it for Beatrice. Way to go, Beatrice. Way to go.
It also doesn't hurt if you're paying her $15 a piece to make your samples. So, you know, it's all about that summer job for her right now. So
Well,
it's working. It's working. She likes it.
So I love that.
Yeah.
And thanks for the history on it. Now, recently I was in Sisters, Oregon.
Right.
And the ladies were there from G's Bend, and they were teaching, and the classroom experience with them is very,
It's a
very
little different, right?
So we thought you guys might want to just see a snapshot of what it's about.
Oh, I'm satisfied with Jesus. Lord, I'm satisfied with Jesus. Well, I'm satisfied with Jesus in my heart. Oh, I'm satisfied with Jesus. Lord, I'm satisfied with Jesus. Well, I'm satisfied.
Now, when I do that, I try not to put two of the same color right there together. I try to break it up.
Break it up.
Lord, he woke me up this morning. Well, he woke me up this morning in my heart. Oh, he woke me up this morning. Yes, Lord, he woke me up this morning.
That's your favorite one?
That's the one that you helped with the colors.
Oh, okay. You remember, see, I did.
He started me on my journey. Yes, Lord, he started me on my journey. Well, he started me on my journey in my heart. Oh, he started me on my journey. Yes, Lord, he started me on my journey. Well, he started me on my journey in my heart. I thank you, Jesus. Yes, I thank you, Jesus. Well, I thank you, Jesus, in my heart. Man. Whew.
I could be famous too.
Lord, I don't want nobody to praise me when I'm gone.
The quilting I do now is almost different from the way Mama showed me how, but this is something I learned over time. When I just pick it up and find a piece, let's say like instant, if I find a piece on the floor and I put it together like that, I just attach and keep on building.
Give me my flower whilst I yet live, whilst I yet live. Lord, I don't want nobody to praise me when I'm gone.
We have a lot of people coming in, they say, can you tell me how to get to G's Bend? And we say, you already here.
I don't want nobody to praise me when I'm gone. Oh, give me my flower whilst I yet live, whilst I yet live. Thank you for those flowers.
That's great. I think that's so exciting. You know, the experience and everything that they're trying to promote is just sow it from your soul, sow it from your heart.
We don't always have to overthink it.
And it doesn't always have to be perfection, because then perfection is causing you to worry about other things that aren't letting you just express. And one of the things that I've always said, passion over perfection. If you can make people feel something, that is so much more important than whether they notice that you did something perfectly.
And let me tell you, the women were sewing in that class, and they come up and go, no, keep going, keep going. It was a very different experience, very inspiring.
Yeah, so thank you to the G's Bend Quilters for allowing our cameras to come into the classroom. We really appreciate that. And Miss Victoria Findlay Wolfe, thank you for inspiring us today and sharing your journey with us and taking us down the road of double wedding ring
Well,
quilts.
I love too, that you were with us before, and we're definitely seeing changes that you're making as an artist, and one thing is just flowing into the next, and that is fantastic.
As an artist, I think that's a good thing, and I think we're all artists. So I think that's one thing all quilters need to embrace, that you're a quilter, but it's good to evolve and
Yes.
keep going forward.
I agree totally. Audience, thank you for joining us today. And everyone at home, thank you for joining us too. And remember, it's a new day every day. That's right.